My name is Andrea Wegner, and I am a Senior Director with DT Global's Conflict Prevention, Stabilization, and Transition practice. I've had the opportunity to lead development programming that engages internally displaced persons, or IDPs, in Afghanistan, Burma, Iraq, Sudan, and Syria. And I'm joined today by three incredible panelists. Next slide, Maggie. So Nazik Mubarak El-Mahi Ahmed is currently the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Associate Director for USAID Office of Transition Initiative's Step Up Sudan program. And Nazik has worked in development and humanitarian assistance programming in Sudan for over 15 years. Katie Kerr is the International Organization for Migration, Head of Peace and Security here in Washington, D.C., and she brings decades of experience working across the humanitarian development nexus in diverse contexts, among them Colombia, Guatemala, Kosovo, and the Lake Chad Basin. And finally, Jonathan Majuk is the director of the Wilson Center's Refugee and Forced Displacement Initiative, where he draws upon his academic and lived experiences to lead critical work to influence policy and programming, placing displaced persons at the center of the dialogue. Thank you all for joining us today and providing your perspectives. So now a bit on logistics. So the four of us are here to offer you our observations and some recommendations, but we know there's a tremendous amount of expertise among the peace builders online. We are eager to have the audience join the conversation, and you're welcome to put comments and questions in the chat as they arise, and we've left some time at the end to answer your questions. But we have one more surprise for you all. So to make this as interactive as possible and give folks the opportunity who may be more comfortable sharing anonymously or take a bit of time, we're going to use the secure application called Mentimeter. So for those of you who may not be aware of Mentimeter, it's an online platform, and you're able to see on the screen a QR code, or if you'd rather not use the QR code, you can type www.menti.com into your browser, on your phone, on your laptop, however you're viewing today, and enter the code that's on the screen. I will also paste the information into the Zoom chat in case it is easier for you to have there. And I'm not seeing an option to do that. Maria, are you able to type that into the chat? So I don't see a way to talk to everybody on there. I'm sorry about that, but we're going to keep going. So hopefully you've had a chance to scan the code, log into the Menti, and we're going to give it a try as we get started. So my question for you all joining in today is, what is one word or phrase that you think of when you hear IDP? So log into Mentimeter. You can scan the QR code on this slide as well. Go to the same place and type in a word or phrase that comes to mind. I'm going to give everyone a minute to be able to do that, and we should start hopefully seeing some words pop up on the screen for us from the audience. So I did not bring music for this part of the session, but you also don't want to hear me sing as we wait. But we'll give everyone just a moment to type in what comes to mind when you hear IDP. These are some great initial words: resilient, brave. And if anyone's having issues getting into Mentimeter, we are going to be using it throughout the session today. Please feel free to let us know in the chat, and we'll do what we can to troubleshoot. This is a good, I feel like we have a good audience already. Resilient, brave. To another: resilience, fatigue, injustice. Absolutely. Good. All right, everyone. Well, thank you all for your initial thoughts, and be ready for the next opportunity to weigh in. So as many are likely aware, internal displacement is at its highest level in modern history. At the end of 2023, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center estimated that the number of IDPs worldwide reached 75.9 million, which is a 51% increase from just 5 years ago. We are here today to think about ways we can engage IDPs as change agents in their communities, and to find ways to slash the silos that impede meaningful engagement. So what are these silos? And I am not talking about those structures that hold grain on the farm that I grew up on. No, I'll share a couple of examples from my work and my experiences, and that's what our esteemed panelists will also talk more about today. So when I worked in Iraq, I spoke with government officials who were tasked with providing services to IDPs. But these government officials, they were not clear on which government body, even though they were the government bodies, was doing what and for whom. And this left the IDPs there and the civil society groups who were meant to be advocating for them to try to navigate this befuddling system. And then the international actors, whether humanitarian, peace building, development, equally befuddled and struggling to provide targeted assistance, including social cohesion and conflict mitigation. In 2014 in Burma, a once underground civil society was eager to advocate for rights and justice, including for the displaced, and donors were eager to support this. However, the donors at the time did not account for the nascent organizational structures and used the same assistance and finance processes that they were accustomed to with much more established organizations in neighboring countries like Thailand. This caused frustration and delays and meant missed opportunities to address grievances and support peace. And my last example from Syria, as schools were bombed, I witnessed teachers, school administrators, and students be displaced, often multiple times. It was so remarkable to see the commitment to continuing education despite these challenges, but also remarkably frustrating to watch as these teachers, as these administrators, as these children navigated different requirements and lack of collaboration between us as humanitarian and development actors. You know, one specific example that just frustrated me so much was development actors were not allowed to join the education cluster meetings that were being hosted by the humanitarian actors. So all of us working to support education for those who were displaced, but not able actually to use a formal structure to collaborate and coordinate on what was needed. This eventually changed with some time and advocacy and a lot of poking. We did get there, but the strictness of these sorts of requirements continues across many sectors that work with those who are displaced. So these are just a handful of examples of where peace building, conflict prevention were deprioritized and siloed within a policy, a program, a structure, a funding mechanism, leading to missed opportunities to address conflict and build sustainable peace. So I'm now going to turn to Katie, who is going to share observations from her and her team's work in Colombia. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I want to start with a few quick notes on the context of the peace process in Colombia. So Colombia took a large step towards ending its half-century armed conflict in 2016 when it signed an agreement with the FARC, which was then the country's largest of the left-wing guerrilla groups. At this point, Colombia has registered 9.8 million victims of its armed conflict. And included in that number are 8.6 million IDPs. Now, many IDPs are victims of multiple violations. So they are victims of being forcibly uprooted from their homes, but they may also be victims of a murder in the family, recruitment of a child within their household, sexual violence. This first map, if I can go to the next slide, is a map of Colombia that shows that displacement is a national phenomenon, but with some notable concentrations in municipalities that have been hit time and time again. Even as conflict actors change, as dynamics change, these municipalities, which you can see with the slightly darker coloring on the map, are concentrations, and at this point, 16% of displacement in Colombia occurred in just 10 municipalities. That's less than 1% of the municipalities in the country. Now, before we look at how to engage IDPs in peace building, I just want to spend a minute looking at why it's so essential to do that. And I think that IDPs have really unique strengths for peace building. One of those relates to the power of their voices, which is really backed by this tremendous moral authority. There's a story of a group of women in the city of Cali, and they worked under the banner of No parí para la guerra. I did not give birth for war. This group was mostly mothers, heads of households, victims. Many of them lost their children in the armed conflict. This group at some point chose to invite and meet with a group of former combatants who had been recruited as children. And they listened to their stories. And when they did that, and when they expressed sympathy and even affection, that message of reconciliation was really more powerful than it could have been coming from almost anybody else. IDPs also have a particular commitment to the cause often. Later, Palacios, who was the survivor of one of Colombia's really worst massacres of the conflict, and then a member of the Truth Commission, later Palacios stated that when you have lived through conflict and suffered discrimination and poverty like I did, you do anything to end it. So these strengths are what makes it so important to really understand how this exemplary participation of victims in Colombia's peace and transitional justice processes, how it came about. Colombia's frameworks for victims' reparations and also for the peace accords, both of them put a really strong emphasis on victim participation. And these efforts, they may be incomplete, certainly imperfect, but really very much unprecedented in terms of the seriousness with which Colombia sought to promote really effective and meaningful participation. So let's look first at the Victims' Law, signed in 2011. It set out a really ambitious framework for comprehensive reparations for victims, including IDPs. And under the law, victim participation is a duty of the state. The government is required to set up these representative victims groups called mesas at the municipal, departmental, and national level, and to ensure that these groups have a real and a strong say in decisions and in programs and in budgeting that affect them. And this picture shows one of the leaders of a victims table in the heavily affected municipality of Pasto. Then we have the peace talks. These went from 2012 to 2016. They also put a very strong emphasis on participation through different mechanisms. The peace negotiators sitting in Havana received 67,000 written proposals from civil society. They also invited 60 victims, 36 women, 24 men, to come to the table. And their physical presence there, right, their attendance, it made it possible for the negotiators, not just possible, necessary. The negotiators really had to confront the violations that had been committed on both sides and the devastating effects that those violations had on people. Participation continues to feature very heavily in peace implementation. So after the signature, I want to just talk about one example, which is about how women IDPs have interacted with the transitional justice mechanisms under the accord. And I want to look at Comadre, which means midwife or godmother, and it's an organization that was created 2 decades ago among Afro-Colombian women who were displaced to the capital city of Bogota. In one of many activities, Comadre works with IDPs whose loved ones have been disappeared. They filed 200 cases to the Peace Accords Unit for Search of Disappeared Persons. They also engage women in a cultural practice around disappearance that has become very significant to many family members of disappeared persons. As you see in this picture, participants sew dolls, and these dolls represent their missing loved ones. They call these dolls kutrus, which refers to a council of wise men and women. And when they come together to sew these dolls, they tell their stories, they sometimes sing, they dress their dolls in the clothes their loved ones wore. And these dolls provide really comfort to the makers, but they've also gone on exhibit around the country and showing again that unique strength of victims' voices. The leader of Comadre explained when these go on these touring exhibits, people who did not experience the war themselves can experience it through us. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for those really powerful examples of connection and voices in Colombia. I'm now going to turn to Nazik to tell us a bit more about Sudan. Nazik, I understand from my conversations with you and our colleagues in Sudan that women have also been critical actors to maintaining the fabric of communities throughout the ongoing conflict. And in a similar vein, just curious, given the scale of the internal displacement in Sudan, how are humanitarian and development actors engaging IDPs to lay the groundwork for eventual peace?
Okay, thank you, Andrea, and hi, everyone. Thank you for always bringing and speaking about how IDPs can be agent for peace. It's a favorite and close to heart for me to talk about how IDPs can be peace agents. So before answering your question, let me lay the ground for what I'm going to say today by sharing with you and the audience a short, touching story about Nadine. So this is Nadine. Is the next slide, Maggie, please. So Nadine is a young Sudanese lady who has been displaced multiple times due to the war in Sudan. But despite her multiple displacement, she continued to hold on and help other internally displaced persons in Sudan. She's mobilizing funds for emergency rooms and kitchens, helping IDPs to get food. Last week, I had a very nice chat with Nadine. I spoke to her and asked her, Nadine, what do you wish now? She simply said to me, I wish to be able to continue providing hope to IDPs in Sudan. And that was touching, actually. So now speaking about how the humanitarian and development actors engaging IDPs in Sudan, I would say they are different, completely different. And what you said, Andrea, in the beginning, I think it's applied maybe in Sudan. So most of the actors in Sudan are focusing and looking to IDP support from the angle of providing services and basic needs like food, water, and medicine, which are completely essential at this stage in Sudan, where people now are not only suffering from war, they are also suffering from the natural disasters, from cholera, from the diseases, and from lack of food. But let me give you another example and allow me to make some cases and examples from OTI Step Up Sudan program where I'm working now. Those examples are like slightly different from other actors are doing by engaging IDPs in peace building. So, for example, one of these examples are what the program is doing in helping IDPs voicing out their needs for peace by demonstrating and highlighting the efforts of youth and women in peace building, and also by facilitating active participation in dialogues and discussions that involve both displaced and host communities. These discussions and dialogues are focusing in the country's future and promoting peace, and also by providing the spaces for displaced and hosting communities to sit together, discuss and plan for peace initiatives in their communities. So in this slide, you can see This photo, I don't know if the audience can understand it, but this is, in this photo, you can see women and youth from both IDPs and host communities collaborating together to run what we call emergency room kitchens, which is the most significant local response initiative now in Sudan to provide food for IDPs within the famine emerging now in Sudan. And believe me, this collaboration is telling a story of social change, cohesion, and unity around a common goal, which is providing food for IDPs. So if we took this an example, like if we took these kitchens, a room from the emergency room as an example, you can see the support coming to these kitchens from different actors are different. So while some actors are providing funds like in kind, like food, like materials, or like these things, OTI Step Up Sudan is focused on enhancing the organization and network and collaboration between these emergency rooms to help them strategically play a role of mitigating conflict and enhance peace and democracy amid the current conflict in Sudan, and keeping the civic space operating and recognized. So this is how you can see how other, like some actors are engaging IDPs to be like peace and change makers in their communities. Another example from OTI, also Step Up program, is the work in enhancing women efforts in education and advocacy for peace and community cohesion by leveraging traditional and safe spaces and art. So in the second slide, you can see how women are advocating for unity during the, for using theater and using these gatherings for people to advocate for peace and unity. You can see how this woman is holding her sister and presenting this unity and like people like working together. This picture is in Blue Nile State in Sudan. So there is also examples, of course, from other actors, like providing psychological support in IDPs camps through youth groups to help them integrate in peace building actions. However, Andrea, what we have learned from working with women and youth groups in peace building in Sudan, there is a big learning, so many learnings. But the key learning is that they still need help and they still need support. And they still need the kind of support that can enhance their resilience to the challenges they are facing. The challenges like the security restrictions, lack of resources, lack of skills, lack of safe platforms and spaces where they can sit together and plan for peace building initiatives and efforts. So the international actors and all actors, I think, might or must provide support to them to navigate these challenges. And here, about talking about the challenges, I would highlight like two examples. One of them is how small NGO in South Kordofan in Sudan managed to navigate the challenge of safe space by leveraging very small space. So in Sudan, women usually sit together and have coffee. So that NGO leveraged that space to sit together and plan for civic actors in their neighborhood. They do so many things there. So another also highlight I would like to highlight it today is that these emergency rooms and IDPs connected together through these emergency rooms and kitchens to provide food for IDPs. For me, it's sending the message of peace and social cohesion and preventing youth from joining the war by having them focus in like this kind of positive, peaceful action instead of go and just take weapons and join the war and for more fighting. So I think we all as international actors need to support this to continue in Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazik. Thank you for those really incredible examples of finding spaces where there is the opportunity where people are gathered and meeting, for those examples of where IDPs and host communities are coming together, finding ways to have unity around a shared cause. I think these are all really helpful as we think about ways that we, as peace builders, as development practitioners, humanitarian actors, can find ways to support them as leaders in their communities. Thank you. I am going to take a quick pulse of the audience here. I promised you we'd be coming back to you all. So for those who didn't join the first couple of minutes of this session, you can scan the QR code on the screen, or there's a website and a code. And essentially, this is a way for you to be able to answer the question anonymously and with your own thoughts and lived experiences. So for everyone on the line, what other ideas do you have for breaking down silos between humanitarian and development actors? And this can be from your experience, it can be from something you've read about, anything goes. We welcome you to put your thoughts, and I'll give everyone a moment to reply. Stronger coordination mechanisms, absolutely. 100% support that one. Any other thoughts on humanitarian development actors and what we might be able to do better in this space? Positive dialogue, great, thank you. I'll give us one more moment to make two-way communication, very good. Thank you. All right, expanding spaces, love it. Thank you, everyone. And please do continue to weigh in. We'll take a look at all of these at the end. I am now going to turn to Jonathan. And I'd like, Jonathan, if you could for us, given your role, your experiences, could you shed light on how policymakers and practitioners address differences in forced displacement situations? So if we're thinking about silos, we have internally displaced and we have refugees who are displaced across state borders. Jonathan, how have you seen the responses to IDPs and refugees differ? And is there any room for improvement? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Before I answer the question, I would like to set the context. The global humanitarian aid is currently coordinated through what is known as the cluster system, which breaks down response functions into silos, at least 15 silos. Each of these silos is led by a set of specialist agencies. For example, you have the health is led by the World Health Organization, food security, World Food Program, et cetera. While this approach was intended for a good purpose, it has led to unintended consequences. One of which is it increases fragmentation, and for our purpose, it marginalizes frontline local actors such as IDPs at the expense of big international NGOs that often lead the coordination. And these institutional silos get more and more embedded over time, and they are reinforced by how funding is allocated, earmarked, and managed. So how we break these silos is more of an internal function in terms of the operation. But it has implication in how we respond to the needs of the displaced people. IDPs, as mentioned earlier, make up the majority of forcibly displaced people, currently over 117 million displaced people in total. So IDPs are the majority, but yet they have been largely overlooked in the humanitarian system and peace building processes. And why is that? It is partly due to perception. There is the perception that all the displaced people are passive victims. There is also the capacity element that because they are displaced, they don't have capacity to participate. And then the nature of the global system, as I mentioned earlier, that it's prioritized refugees over IDPs because the framework for refugees is well defined. And then another reason why this is the case is the persisting institutional silos that prevent the humanitarian development and peace building triple nexus from being realized. So the point is, excluding the participation of this significant ID population in the peace process and not incorporating their concern in peace plan is unrealistic and unsustainable. For starters, IDPs are displaced people within their country of origin. They are displaced to other part of the country. Refugees are those who have crossed the international borders and they are in a host country. So the specific needs of IDPs make the case for special attention that should be given to them in the peace process, in the sense that they make up the majority of the population. And excluding that big number from the peace itself is sustainable. But overall, whether it's IDP or refugees or asylum seekers, the best response to this situation is to address the principal cause of their displacement. And so resolving forced displacement is inseparably linked to achieving peace, and it is in the best interest of the displaced people. There are areas where response is different given the status of each of these categories. They are different in vulnerability. IDPs are more vulnerable because they still live in the conflict zone. They are under the government that forced them to leave their homes. The IDP legal status is that they are citizens of the country that they are in, whereas refugees are protected under international law and host countries have their responsibility. Aid delivery and coordination, it is a huge difference. For IDPs, it is very, very difficult for humanitarian outside organizations to have access to IDPs in their own country. One example, from my own example, when I was in IDP camp, as a result of the Second Sudanese Civil War in 1980s and the 90s, the International Committee of the Red Cross was the only relief organization that was allowed by the government to deliver food supplies to IDPs inside Sudan. And there were restrictions. So the ICRC plane would airdrop the food supply in the ID camp because that's what the government has allowed to do. And at some point, that was very difficult for the IDPs to receive food aid in time because it was difficult to come in time to rescue the situation. At some point, you see the ICRC airplane dropping the food supply, and then at other time, a government plane would come and drop bomb on the IDP. So you see the complexity here for IDPs. That was really a scary situation. You never know who is going to drop what. But that shows you the complexity and difficulty in access. IDPs have less funding, they have less international attention, and I think that is due to the fact that they don't have a binding framework that protects them under international law. They are expected to be protected by the government that is actually for them to leave their home. So there must be a way in terms of the system itself, but also the operation to make sure the response is effective. for IDPs or refugees, it doesn't matter. They are all getting assistance. And whether it comes from the World Food Program or from another institution, those silos make no difference. But I think the case here is that we should understand the complexity in the system, the mindset in the system, the mindset that view IDPs as a recipient of peace outcome rather than active citizens with agents. The mindset that reduce them to beneficiaries of aid, whose constant need for food, water, and shelter is a priority. While that is true on the humanitarian side, the development side cannot wait. Because right now, the complexity of forced displacement is inside that IDP situation and refugee situation are lasting longer. And so we have to change the mindset. And I will talk about that at the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you also for sharing some of your own personal experience having experienced it directly and how these silos can really impact in the complexity of the conflicts and the perpetrators that are engaged in internal displacement can be challenging. But I think what we're here now to do is really to think about things that we can do differently and do better. And so one of our aims today as part of this incredible gathering of peace builders worldwide is to think collectively about how we might all do better and how we might shake up the status quo. And in that vein, I would like to hear from our panelists in just a moment, but also the audience. And I promised you we would keep coming back to you all. So on the screen, you'll see another Mentimeter slide. If you're currently still logged in, you should see it pop up on your phone or your computer. If not, use the QR code or the website at the top. And the question we're posing to you all, if you could make only one or maybe two recommendations, you're welcome to post more than once, for how we can do a better job of engaging IDPs as change agents and peace builders in multi-sectoral development programming, what would it be? So I invite you all, think about this. Feel free to put your thoughts up on the screen, and I will, as you all are thinking of your own thoughts over the next couple of minutes, I'll now turn the mic over to Nazik to get us started from our panelists. Nazik, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Before making the recommendation, I would like to highlight the challenges of IDPs assistance in Sudan. And this is not far from what John was saying now. And I wanted the audience to think about some recommendations with me and paste it in Mentimeter now. So going back when the war started in Sudan, we witnessed a change in the displacement pattern in Sudan. And how was it? That was like after the war started, we witnessed new location hosting IDPs, which never experienced hosting IDPs before. They were not prepared to host IDPs, but now they are hosting IDPs, basically the north and the east of Sudan. We also witnessed like a pattern of multiple displacement. For example, people in Darfur, now they are experiencing their second and third displacement. People left Khartoum to Jazeera, and after a Jazeera attack, they left to Sinnar, and after a Sinnar attack, they left to the east. And this is like showing you the rapidly shifting from being hosting community to displaced community, which is new pattern in Sudan. So the question now, and that was raised also by John, how and who is getting support from IDPs in Sudan? Of course, those in the safe areas are getting that support, although it's not sufficient, but those in the conflict zone are completely left. Agencies cannot reach them due to the lack of protection mechanism for their workers and also for the assistant to reach people. It might be looted in the road while it's going to people in need. So due to the lack of this mechanism, Unfortunately, and adding to the internet cut out and like the looting of assistance, the fund flow to Sudan for IDPs negatively affected. Unfortunately, some of the actors cut their budget to Sudan. However, the good news is that amid of these challenges, all these challenges, Sudanese youth and women, CSOs, activists, media influencers, artists are still striving to work as peace agents and advocates by keeping peaceful tools and methods. Of course, they are not using weapons to stop the war and fight to stop the war, but they are using these like peaceful methods to fight this main cause of the displacement in Sudan, which is the war. In this screen, in this slide, you can see so many screenshots. All these screenshots from media influencers pages who are advocating for peace and more support for IDPs in Sudan. And you can see what kind of touching messages they are advocating and using to mobilize more support for IDPs in Sudan and to stop the war. In the next photo, in this photo, Maggie, yeah, this one, you can see this famous musician. His name is Asim Al-Taib. He is accompanied with Bashir. He's a peace media advocate, and together they are moving around the displaced, the disabled people in the camps and refugees, advocating for peace and sending these hope and peace messages, and advocating for children in education. When now around or over than 20 million children are out of schools for 2 years. Can you imagine what is the situation of IDPs? So you can see those influencers, despite they were displaced internally and externally, being refugees or IDPs, they are still paying great effort advocating to get assistance for their people, especially those who are still in the conflict zone and they cannot move to like safe areas. They are advocating for them. In addition to those who were hosted in the safe areas, but vulnerable to deteriorating economy and basic services, they don't have money even to buy. So based on that, if I can give some recommendation, my first recommendation would be that the international actors, development, humanitarian actors, would support like these advocate groups by providing funding to keep their efforts as peace agents and leaders for peace building. And that can be, of course, by building their resilience and enhancing their local and peaceful initiatives, which can demonstrate their leadership in achieving peace in Sudan. But believe me, Andrea, it's not always about funds and about providing money for IDPs. It's not only about just like providing food and shelter. I think I like completely and highly recommend that decision and policy makers to do more by empathetically listening to the voice of IDPs. They are the ones who are affected by war. They were forced to leave their homes and they need to go back home. All of them need to go back home. And this can be, I think, by listening to them and their voice and their sentiment to stop the war in Sudan. Now IDPs, believe me, in Sudan, they are not only affected by weapons, they are affected by so many like floods, disasters, like cholera, diseases, and famine, which is emerging now in Sudan. So, but fortunately, there are some initiatives. We are witnessing some international initiatives now and talks in Geneva, and if you are following, to stop the war in Sudan. But still, I would say there is a need to call for protection for Sudanese, including IDPs, including also the international actors and workers so that they can provide help to IDPs in Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazik. Jonathan, I'm going to turn it over to you for your recommendations.
Thank you, Andrea. So my first recommendation is we need to shift the mindset that is embedded in the global system by framing IDPs as peace agents with human agency, instead of receiving them as passive victims, as recipient of peace. They need to be framed as active participants in the peace. And I think it starts with that thinking. We have to start with that thinking. Second, we need to develop an integrated approach to programming to realize the IDP nexus gains. Because if we do it in silos, for example, the picture of the silo you saw earlier on, there is food security, there is education, there is all kind of things. But I think the people we are serving, the displaced people, they don't see it that way. It's their entire life. With the security, it has to be approached with human dignity in mind. And so when you have that integrated approach, that frame the issues, then that is an important part. A third is the international mediators, peacemakers, NGOs need to respect the IDP governance structure through which a legitimate representative can be nominated to participate in peace process. So this is very important because oftentimes outside intervention, come in and says, oh, we see this would be a good representative for the community. But unless you go through the structure of that community, the IDP are their own community in their own country that they are in. And they have a certain way that they have organized themselves. So for us to bring them to participate in peace building activity that would benefit them, we need to go through their system, whether it's a traditional system or it's ad hoc, however they have organized themselves. And I will just give an example shortly. This is important for accountability. The representative selected through this governance structure would come back to the community and would advocate on behalf of the community. And my final recommendation is to empower IDPs and support IDP-led initiative, especially IDP women initiative. One example with the first, recommendation is that despite the displacement that has occurred and these people have left their homes, the thirst for education does not end. It's continued, and that is not a humanitarian. It is both a humanitarian and development and peace. So if you develop the whole person by making sure education continue, that is an example of an integrated approach. When I was in the IDP camp or refugee camp, we never stopped learning. And it is integrated into the basic necessities that wherever we find ourselves displaced, we learn under the tree. And that's something that policymakers need to keep in mind. In terms of the, there is a picture there about, 3 people in that picture. One of them, you realize that is a woman. And this is about challenging the status quo. This is a woman doing a construction work in South Sudan in the IDP campsite. That is something traditional, not a role played by the woman. But here, the woman is doing this to support herself and her family through that income from the construction work. But it is challenging the status quo in that, well, women are capable, they have agency to do this. And I think this comes to empowering them and give them the support they need to be able to develop their human person, but also to be part of the agent for change, whether it's in development or in peace. Let me quickly come to some of the examples. In this principle, it is possible that when you involve IDPs, that you can see the result. Some example in Guatemala in 1987, for example, going back just, the Guatemala refugees in Mexico organized themselves into permanent commission, and they participate in track one peace process. And as a result, they were incorporated in the October 8 Accord that was signed between the government of Guatemala and them. That is refugee. Now, in terms of the IDPs with the Burundi, the Peace and Reconciliation Agreement that was signed incorporate IDPs issues into track two negotiation, and that was successful. In the country of Georgia, IDP organized themselves, women group, and come together and participate in the peace process. And finally, in Angola, the Angola Center for Common Ground engaged IDPs in local peace activities through theater production, dialogue groups, radio soap operas, and they were able to participate in track three processes. Some of those who have participated in the training were able to assume leadership, and that is how they got to be part of the peace mediation team. And in South Sudan right now, those who have been displaced from one part of the country to the other work together with the local host community and participate in activities such as wrestling, which is a cultural practice, but it also a resilient mechanism while they are waiting for time to return home. And so I think changing the mindset to make sure these people, they have human dignity, they have agency, will help us to give them the opportunity to participate in activity that not only benefit them, but also the entire country in terms of being active participants in peace process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for those great recommendations and excellent examples as well. Really appreciate it. Katie, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. Sure. I'd say my first recommendation is to really recognize the transformative and critical role of mental health and psychosocial support in allowing engagement and opening the door to engagement. Leaders among Colombia's displaced women, they talk a lot about healing and about opening up and breaking the silence and finding trust and finding courage. And one woman from a group of IDPs and sexual violence victims in Cauca, she said, without healing, many of us would be sunk in our sorrow and our pain and our suffering. But after healing, that same group went on to do really amazing things. to support other victims, but also to coordinate and cooperate with former combatants to prevent recruitment of children within their communities. As these pictures show, women seek this healing in different ways, sometimes psychological care, sometimes group therapy, but also art and music, theater and sculpture. And IOM is working in some of the really hardest hit communities of Colombia, trying to promote this healing and provide opportunities for psychosocial well-being. And what we just keep finding is that once that healing takes root, then you see women begin to speak more in public spaces and engage more with other community members and really participate in decisions and in public events. So we need to make healing support more widely available and recognize that mental health and psychosocial support are really foundational to personal and collective achievements across the silos, right? Starting at the emergency and really through to recovery. It's a necessary element. My second recommendation is related, but it's about focusing on conditions and looking for the conditions that make engagement in transitional justice and peace building possible for IDP women. And to identify them, we need to ask IDP women what the obstacles are to their engagement. Let's consider the story of 80 Embera indigenous women. They're pictured here. And they were victims of sexual violence. And they were willing and ready to state there, to file a report to the special court of the crimes committed against them. And they were supported in this by a group of women called the Professional Network of Women and Victims. And it became apparent to the network that these 80 women were largely illiterate, and that they felt like their ability to defend their own rights was really constrained by this illiteracy. So the network organized literacy courses, and they were hugely popular with this group of Embera indigenous women. And when they graduated, the first thing they did was contact the governor and demand a bus to the registrar's office and have their cédulas, or their national IDs, reprinted so that they could then sign them themselves. Literacy for these women was a condition for their leadership and their self-confidence. In other cases, there are other obstacles to engagement. To cite one last example, in Colombia, fear is a real obstacle to engagement. Just in the first 5 months of 2024, there were already reports of 6 murders of women leaders and human rights defenders. I mentioned these visitors, victims who went to Havana to participate in the peace process. Of the 60, about a quarter of them reported being re-victimized after returning from Havana, returning to Colombia. And that may have been harassment, but also death threats, also forcible displacement in some cases. So protection is a recurring condition also for engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Those were excellent recommendations. And I think from what I have seen from other contexts, whether Syria or Iraq or even Afghanistan, I think so many of those really, really resonate. And I think what I'm hearing from all of this incredible wisdom among our panelists and from our audience is that, you know, those who are internally displaced have the ability to become leaders, like true leaders of peace efforts, both at the local level, but also all the way up to the most national and international levels to advocate for peace. And it seems like we in the peace building world, in the development world, in the policy think tank world, all really we have some hard work to do to make sure that we are finding ways to make space to advocate. I'm hearing a lot about women in leadership and women peace builders as leaders as well, and finding those spaces to support and encourage. So I am mindful of time. I just appreciate, again, you all so much for your remarks, for your recommendations. I'm going to turn to our audience now, and we've got about 10 minutes, maybe a little less than 10 minutes for questions. I haven't seen any come through in the chat. You aren't able to come off of mute in this particular setting, but you do feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the chat, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. So please do drop some into the chat, and we'll take them one by one with the time remaining. Any questions out there? right, I'm not seeing anything yet. So I'm going to ask you all a question. Oh, we have one. We have one in the chat. Oh, great. So this question, we got two questions, one from Emily and one from David. So Emily's question is, especially in places like Sudan and South Sudan, where we hear about the high rate of conflict-related sexual violence or CRSV, how can we engage IDPs who are also survivors of CRSV as change makers? And then the second question from David, have there been any efforts to provide conflict resolution training or healing in Sudan today? So I will direct the first question about how we're engaging IDPs who are survivors. I think we heard some of that from Katie and a bit from Nazik already. But Katie, if there's anything else you'd like to add from the Colombia or your other work and other places context, or Sudan and Jonathan, anything on engaging survivors of CRSV as change makers?
Emily, let me just jump in quickly and just really emphasize this focus on healing. And I don't want to suggest that healing is only important in cases of sexual violence. I think that we've seen the need for healing really across the board. And you know, the trauma is felt by many different victims. But what we have really seen with victims of sexual violence is the importance of healing that's led by other women who are victims of sexual violence. And so much of what's worked is being able to start with, you know, perhaps a small group of women leaders and victims, and work through a healing cycle with them, and often with professionals at that point. But then they are then really the spokespeople for the importance of this healing, and they are able to reach out to many other, again, particularly women, but not exclusively, who otherwise are too, the trauma is too strong. There are too many other obstacles. There's too much fear about talking about what happened to them. There are so many different obstacles to seeking out that kind of help, that we found the way to break that obstacle, and then you start the moving on healing and becoming change makers, is to have other women victims be the ones that take the message to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. And I think, Jonathan, you had something you wanted to add to this one.
Yeah, what I want to add is the sensitivity of this matter. It is a very, very sensitive. In how do we actually even have access to these people while they are inside the country where that sexual violence took place? And so I want to add to the point that we have to be very careful, because it could even be a double trauma if we don't do it right. And I think it speaks to the advocate. How do you align your message to make sure even the government that has the IDPs in its own territory be mindful to make sure this conflict-related sexual violence doesn't occur? There has to be accountability, and the United States government, through the U.S. Agency for International Development, does support IDPs in country, and then I think should be embedded also in the funding mechanism and you found, there has to be accountability. But I just want the sensitivity therein is very important to note. You are muted, and we can't hear you.
It was technology this session was going so well, and the one basic faux pas. All right, thanks, Jonathan. Thank you for that that really important reminder as well. Nazik, I'm going to turn over to you now to respond to David's question about efforts to provide conflict resolution training and healing in Sudan. I know our teams on the ground have done quite a bit of that, but please offer your experience.
So So I will give David 2 examples. We are in the OTI step of program. We provide this training for women in Blue Nile. And I can see David, he has some experience in working in Blue Nile. So basically, we aimed from that training to increase engagement and like in higher level of women in decision making within their communities. Given, as John said, the traditional restrictions in Sudan that prevent women into participating like these high-level like conflict resolution committees in their communities. So we provided that training for women, and they had this training. We also provide the same training for some of the community leaders, and they are participating in conflict resolution in their communities. For the trauma healing, as John said, the accessibility to people inside Sudan to heal about this sensitive topic is a bit difficult or like completely difficult. So what we have done and in our experience that we supported the radio outside Sudan. And that radio is providing like this kind of trauma healing messages. I witnessed a very touching story when I did like an interview with some of the listeners of that radio in an IDP camp in Chad. She was telling me that she experienced a gender-based violation. And after she listened to that program in that radio, she became like completely healed, and she started providing the same healing for the women who experienced that gender-based violence in the camp. And now she is helping them to heal from their traumas and from that violation. So these kind of things, yeah, I can say that, yeah, there are some actors who are providing that. And you can see if the accessibility is hard to those in Sudan, there is another process. You can access them from outside Sudan, like using media, using radios, like for those inside Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazik. Thanks, Nazik, Jonathan, and Katie for responding to our audience questions. You're not done yet, audience. One last Mentimeter, bear with us, but this is an important one. We're really eager to hear from those who are able to join today. Coming away from this session, coming away from your own experiences, your own reading, your own studies, whatever it is, what will you do to shift the status quo and break down barriers to better engage displaced persons in peace building? And I couldn't help myself. What silo will you slash? So I'm going to give us just a couple of minutes. Please, you can put more than one response in. Invite anyone who's on the line right now to share thoughts on what you are excited to do in your work moving forward. Again, I should have built some music in. You're very lucky that I'm not going to sing while I'm giving you time to do this, but really appreciate you engaging and hearing from those online. So better trauma-informed support for IDPs. Absolutely, exactly. I know Katie, Jonathan, Nazik all touched on some of the work that's being done, but I think we can always do more, absolutely. And also thinking about those systems and structures and those silos that Jonathan pointed out in the cluster graphic he shared. How do we break those down? How do we make sure that if it is a health program, that there is some level of psychosocial support built in? If it's an agriculture, economic livelihoods program, how can we be thoughtful about integrating trauma-informed programming in something that is not in the humanitarian sector, not in the peace building sector? Preventing toxicity in communication and social media, preventing polarization. Absolutely. Our words matter. For those who are able to see the former Northern Ireland president speak yesterday, if there was any takeaway I had from her session, it was that our words absolutely matter. How we talk about one another, what we say, that's something that we can absolutely do better. I'm going to give us one more moment. Anyone else have thoughts on slashing silos moving forward? All right. Well, thank you all for joining today's session. We have heard examples of IDPs as peace builders and many recommendations for how we as the peace building community might help change the status quo to build sustainable peace. A really special thanks to our amazing panelists, Nazig, Jonthan, Katie. Thank you so much for all of the work that went into this, for the examples, for the stories. They were really, really meaningful and powerful. And also to the Alliance for Peace Building, a special shout out to Nick, who was our organizer this year, for providing the opportunity to have this important conversation. It is just the start. I look forward to seeing some of you at the conference and continuing the conversation. And for those who are joining more sessions today, enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you.